Women Up Radio, designed to facilitate women's empowerment, improve your career, develop your talents, incorporate your passions, achieve fulfillment and success.
Hello, this is Women Up Radio, supporting Empower Women, and today we're talking about how to support good emotional health, so reduce anxiety and stress, and also about managing pre- and postnatal and really practical tips for health, diet and exercise. I'm joined in the studio by my guest, Dr. Rebecca Moore. She's a perinatal psychiatrist who's an expert in women's emotional health, especially with pregnancy and the early postnatal period, as well as strongly supporting holistic choices, including diet, exercise, and avoiding drugs as a be-all and end-all, something I agree with very strongly. So welcome to the programme, Becca.
Hi, Anna. Good morning.
Hi. So, Becca, can we start? Would you tell me about your work? As a perinatal psychiatrist, I know you specialise in supporting women pre- and post-pregnancy, but also you're an expert in managing anxiety, reducing stress, and so on. Can you tell us a bit more about the problems you encounter, how they affect us, and particularly that when we're trying to keep going with a successful career?
Sure. So I think, there's lots of different strands in that question.
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's really fine. So in
one.
So I work in the NHS and privately, and in the NHS I work in the perinatal team.
Mm-hmm.
So the focus of that work is very much around supporting women through pregnancy and up to a year postnatally with all different kinds of emotional issues. So that might be anxiety, depression, or there might also be women with a diagnosis of something like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. So that's one part of the work that I do, and that would be supporting women and their families throughout that whole journey of pregnancy and becoming a mum, and thinking with them about the kind of support that they would like to keep really, really well through that process. And some of those women may have a prior history of anxiety, perhaps, say.
Yeah.
Some have no prior history at all, and it's something that's changed or evolved during their pregnancy.
Yes.
That's one strand of work. And I suppose more perhaps in the private setting, I would commonly be working with women who are perhaps from a corporate background, but not necessarily, who are experiencing anxiety, stress, burnout, call it what you will, but are finding it very difficult and anxiety-provoking in general in their life and trying to balance that with maintaining a career.
Yes.
And those would be a group of women that perhaps I would see more within a private setting.
Yeah.
And would be looking with them about ways to reduce their overall stress. They don't necessarily have a clinical anxiety.
Yes.
But they're just finding life very difficult at that point. They're battling with all the demands that we have as women working, being parents, being partners, and it's really affecting them on a day-to-day basis. And so that would be slightly different, perhaps, to where the focus is about pregnancy.
Okay.
And I would see both of those sort of presentations very commonly, unfortunately. Not unfortunately in a way, actually, perhaps that's the wrong thing to say, because I think it's very good that people are more aware of their emotional health. And actually, a lot of women now are very proactive in thinking, actually, something's not quite right. What can I do to feel better about this? And that's really positive. And often there are very small things that you can do that can make a huge change.
Yes, I know. I mean, with you saying that, anxiety and stress seem to be ever more present. I mean, particularly in the media and even in the programs that people do related to work. But do you think, in fact, that it is more present, or is it more that the media's got hold of it and therefore they're raising the awareness and they're raising the profile for mental health issues?
I mean, I think in reality it's probably a mixture of both. I think that it's good that people are more aware about their emotional health, and I think historically perhaps people just buried those feelings, didn't talk about them, didn't feel able to talk about them, or perhaps were using sort of poor coping mechanisms, so drinking too much, smoking too much, as a way to manage their anxiety. So I think in some ways it's very positive. I think there's definitely a shift in the media to be more aware of our own emotional health, and it's definitely being talked about more, which is great. And I think that reduces stigma for people and they feel more able to speak out.
Yes.
I think we've still got a long way to go with that.
Yeah.
But it's a positive start. Yeah. I think the difference probably is between if you distinguish between what's an actual clinical episode of anxiety and what is stress.
Yeah.
And I think stress in itself is incredibly powerful emotion and can feel really, really difficult. And I think what has changed probably is that people perceive themselves as being more stressed in life, being more overwhelmed, more busy. And I think that, reflects the pace of life we all live in. It reflects social media, the amount of information we're all exposed to on a daily basis compared to, how things would have been 10, 15, 20 years ago. We're sort of bombarded with information from the moment we wake up. We carry our phones with us. We're constantly exposed to all these different pressures and feeling we should be checking in with all our social media, and there's emails pinging in, and we're very accessible immediately. We can't escape from it. And I think that adds to people's sense of feeling pressured and stressed and that they don't have time for things. And I think it also blurs the boundaries between work and home.
Yes.
A lot of corporate women. So people feel that they're constantly on. That it's very hard to have a downtime. And I think over time that can really lead to the perception of being very stressed and very fatigued, and it can actually affect people's sleep if they're lying with their phone next to them. The blue light from the phone we know disturbs melatonin, so it alters sleep patterns. And I think there's lots of evidence now that the first thing most people do in the morning is reach immediately for their phone. So we're sort of on from the moment we wake up.
Yeah.
That does feed into that perception of people feeling very stressed and overwhelmed.
Yes, yeah. I know, well, thinking back to my mother's generation, if there was ever any kind of, even the most minute suggestion that somebody had a mental health issue in whatever form, whether it was just feeling stressed, feeling a bit down, no one would talk about it. And my mother would be horrified if ever I said, oh God, I feel really miserable and down. She was like, no, you don't, you feel absolutely fine, there's no problem. And I was like, okay, don't panic, right? I'm just saying today I'm not feeling really on top of the world. I'm not saying that there's something desperately wrong, but the slightest thing, and her generation seemed to panic like mad and try to hide it. Whereas I know some of my friends, I've got friends who are bipolar. I've got a friend who has someone in the family who has got mental health problems that are quite difficult to cope with. I know someone who's a very high-flying corporate who, when she got pregnant and had the baby, she went into major postnatal depression. And I find today, well, maybe it's just my group, I'm not sure, but we seem to talk about it a lot more openly and without the stigma. It's much more an idea of how can we help, and not, oh my God, it's shocking. Do you think that's true across the board, or do you think it's some areas are better, or some countries are better, or some age groups are better?
I think there's definitely some age groups are better. I think, as you've said, I think the older generation still find it much more difficult to talk about their mental health. And, they've come from a background of the sort of classic stiff upper lip and, keeping things private and, wouldn't dream of talking about it and find it much more difficult to talk about. I think on the whole, people growing up in the younger generation are much more aware of it and much more open about it, which is really good. Yeah. So, I see my children, they're talking about it in school, they're thinking about their mental health in a way that I don't recall ever having a discussion about that at school, ever. Yeah. So I think that's really good. And I think, there should be parity of mental health with physical health. It is just as important as your physical health. And you cannot function well if you're feeling mentally unwell. And the interplay between, physical health and mental health is crucial. Yeah. So we need to, consider that as part of any assessment of anybody's symptoms. We should be thinking about their physical health and their mental health because they're so intertwined. You can't think about one without the other. So to sort of ignore mental health is never going to work as a treatment plan for anybody. Yeah. So definitely for a younger population, there's much more awareness and much more openness. Yeah. If you look across countries and cultures, there's huge differences in how people perceive mental health, and clearly there's still a lot more stigma in certain countries than in others. So I think in the United Kingdom it's pretty good, really. Yeah. And we're definitely one of the better countries. Probably Europe as a whole is perhaps better than some perhaps of say African countries or Asian countries where it's still very much more taboo to think about mental health, and certainly their provision of services is not as well established and mapped out as it would be in the United Kingdom.
Yes, yeah. And I know some of us are trying to juggle a lot of problems at the same time. Mm-hmm. So possibly we might not even recognise that we're starting to struggle with various mental health issues or stress or anxiety. Yeah. Probably because we don't have time to think about ourselves. We're just too busy. So what sort of signs should we look out for, that should we take into consideration, to raise a warning sign that we should do something?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think it's always about the degree of symptoms. So we can all have a really bad day where we feel terrible, we feel tearful, we feel fed up. But when things start to become most of the day and more than one day, and a sort of persistent sense of things changing, then I think that's becoming something slightly different. So commonly, things that women will talk about is feeling anxious, feeling that sort of butterflies in the stomach, feeling on edge, feeling it's hard to relax even when they're at home, feeling overwhelmed, feeling less resilient at work. So not being able to focus at work in a way that normally they would just blitz through things. Yeah. And it really that they can't focus on things, they don't know where to start, they're just finding it all too overwhelming. There might be a change in appetite. So sometimes people will talk about losing their appetite or eating more than normal. Yeah. Sleep is a really big issue for many women. So they might describe that they're just not being able to fall to sleep because their mind feels so full. Yes. Their thoughts are racing. It's taking them hours to go to sleep. Or they might fall asleep because they're exhausted, but then wake at 2-3 in the morning and then not be able to get back to sleep after that. Yeah. And then obviously impact for relationships, so there can be increased irritability, arguing with partner, family, friends, feeling irritable with children, not feeling that you're coping and balancing that work and home life. And it's really about, sitting and having to think about that and thinking, well, that's not just been one day. But if I think about the last few months, I've felt like that quite a lot. And I felt like that most weeks. And I just feel like I'm not really enjoying things as much as normal, or perhaps I'm not being as social as normal, or I've realised that I'm drinking more than normal to get to sleep. Yeah. It can be any or all of those things, really. But very commonly for women, it will be that sense of feeling very anxious and overwhelmed, and perhaps the performance at work or at home changing.
Yes, yeah. And in those cases, what would you advise as a sort of first step, just to put a little bit more distance, have a little bit more calm? Is there anything that you'd advise just, initially, before it goes too far?
Yeah, so I think, just a recognition of that, taking a moment to think about what symptoms am I experiencing and how long has it been going on for, and having a think about that first, just taking a breath, taking a pause. And then I think after that, it can be, maybe looking at your work-life balance as a first step. Is there any way that I can just sort of reduce the stresses on me at the moment? I think if people are able to think of immediate, simple things that they can change, that can often make a huge difference. So it might just be telling somebody that you're experiencing these things. That can help in itself, just letting go of some of it.
Yes.
That might be with friends, with a partner, and that can be really powerful in its own right. Just saying, I feel like I'm really struggling at the moment. Can you think of any ways that we can change, or can you support me through this?
Yeah.
It might be things like talking to work, letting them know that you're feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Yeah.
There's only scope to have some support there, but I think that's often something women don't want to do.
Yes.
They don't want to feel that they're letting people down or that they're failing at work.
Yeah.
It might be about saying, look, I'm going to leave work right on time. I'm going to be really strict with myself, and instead of staying late, I'm going to make a conscious effort to leave on time, and then perhaps I'm going to do something for myself 1 or 2 times a week. So I really like swimming, so I'm going to go swimming, or I might go to a yoga class.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure that I'm eating really, really well.
Yeah.
Looking after myself.
Yeah.
Might be something like, just saying I'm going to have, try and create a wind down in the evening. So, avoiding watching television for a couple of hours before bed, or looking at screens.
Yes.
Bath, using oils, lighting some candles. It sounds, really obvious, but actually things like that, if you really commit to them and build them into your life, and it's about prioritizing yourself and saying, I'm worthy of this time for myself. I deserve to look after myself.
Yeah.
That becomes a habit and a routine. It can be really helpful.
Yes.
Tiny things, but they can make a huge difference to people's stress levels.
Yeah.
So all of those things are really positive things to start with.
I know the one of the ones you said about telling a friend. I know it's so simple, but maybe British more than other people, I don't know, but British tend not to admit when they feel like they can't cope. But I know if I'm about to scream at everybody and I realise that I'm under too much stress, one of my closest friends, I just phone up and say, I want to kill everyone, I hate this, and they normally start by laughing and saying, okay, well, who do you want to kill first and why? And I have a good rant for 15 or 20 minutes. And at the end, I feel so much better. And I haven't actually done anything, and it hasn't changed the situation, but I just feel so much better. And it's almost as if I've vocalized the issues that are stressing me. And because I've done that, I can see them and I've become more objective.
And I think it's about finding that thing for you that enables you to do that. So, whether it's be chatting to a friend. So for me, I often go boxing, and so I can imagine that the boxing bag is whoever's really irritating me that day, and found it for have a good old whack of the boxing bag for 10 minutes. And afterwards I feel fantastic, because I've got rid of all that in a really healthy way, and I feel good because I've exercised as well.
Yes.
But absolutely, friends, I think is or family is an amazing way to sort of offload, and we all should do that. And as you say, in reality, it's can be 10 or 15 minutes, but the benefits afterwards, you feel so much better.
Yes.
I think if you can't do that, verbally, because some people do find it hard to talk it out, look for other ways. So that might be writing it down in a diary or a journal. Some people really, really helpful, or painting, or exercise, something non-verbal can be just as helpful, because not everybody can talk freely about their emotions. It can be very hard for them to name what they're feeling.
Oh, I definitely, when I was younger, I couldn't have done it. Now that I'm older, I think I don't really care what people think now. Well, I don't mean that to sound nastily, but I'm a lot more relaxed about whether I come across as being superwoman or just, me. But if ever I can't talk it out, or I feel it's a situation I don't actually want to talk about, another thing I find really good is walking. I love walking anyway, but walking in nature, I just come back with a totally different mentality. Yoga as well. I love yoga.
There is so much evidence about being in nature being effective for your mental health. Loads and loads of studies now about the effect of being walking outside in the countryside and how effective that is for mental health. Also, a huge amount of evidence about yoga, anything to do with breathing, really. So meditation, yoga, Pilates in particular, that's very much based around the breath and bringing you back to breathing, is incredibly powerful as a treatment for anxiety. And for women with a milder form, so perhaps that group that are feeling stressed, that type of exercise is as effective as taking an antidepressant.
Yes, that's correct. I know with some of my corporate clients who I know are under stress anyway, I've been recommending to them to try and make some of their smaller meetings walking meetings. So if there's 2 or 3 of them, just to go out and walk while they have the meeting, because apart from the fact it makes the meeting go better and they have better ideas, they come back less stressed, which in general, which I think is great. Any excuse to get out of the office.
No, absolutely. And then, if you add into everything that we know about how bad it is for you to sit statically all day, anything that you can do walking. I do the same. So I will purposely build in home visits into my diary in a way that I can walk to and from the visit. So I can have that space walking, where likewise I'm often making phone calls, but I'm outside, it's a sunny day, where I can perhaps stop and have a quick coffee, and it's just, I find it a wonderful part of my day.
No, it's great. Okay, I've got another question that's much more focused on careers and the problems that people can have with problems, mental health problems, or depression, or bipolarity, or something like that. I know I've had talks with friends and colleagues and things like that, and a lot of people think that it isn't possible to have a successful career if you're suffering from some kind of problem, whether it's depression or, as I said, bipolarity. But I feel these days that you can still be successful and you still can have a good career with these types of problems. What do you think? Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely possible. I could name you numerous colleagues that I work with that are very senior in the NHS that have bipolar disorder themselves, and or depression. And actually some of them have been very open about that, and it's really informed their own work. And they've felt that it's actually been very useful in their career, because it gives them a very different perspective of what it's like to live with diagnosis, and it really informs how they speak with other people that have that diagnosis. So I don't think that it should stop anybody in their career at all. Clearly there can be periods where it requires much more thought, and it can be more difficult and more challenging at times. there's absolutely no reason why somebody with that kind of diagnosis can't be having a very successful career. I mean, I think part of it depends on who you're working for and with.
Yes.
Relationship with them, how supportive they are. You know, I have met some people who've been hiding their diagnosis, and I think that's always much more difficult.
Yes.
I think if you are able to be open and explain, you know, your diagnosis, that can usually be a much more positive thing, because your employer's aware, they can put in extra support if you're having, you know, a difficult period of time.
Yeah.
So it very much depends around who you work for, how you work. I think, you know, often women have built in just a very good sort of treatment plan around themselves, and they know how to keep well, and they know when they're not so well, and there's a whole system that they would put in at that place, at that time, to look after themselves. So that, you know, it needs a bit more thought and care. But, you know, a huge proportion of the women I work with are having episodes of ill health, but not necessarily taking time off work.
Yes.
They're still going to work, and often work will be a very protective thing. It gives structure to their day. They love their work. They enjoy their work.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't stop anybody from working at all. I mean, there may be cases where work is part of the issue and has become a stressor.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes perhaps women will choose to reduce their hours, or reduce to move to a different role. I've worked with women that are barristers, lawyers, doctors, senior, higher level teachers, politicians that have depression and bipolar. So it shouldn't stop women at all.
Excellent. And I mean, it's not the same, but linked to that, it seems that the higher up the ladder we go, the more we're under pressure. And if we're a mum, because normally as mums we're the primary caregiver, so we try to be good mothers. We want to make sure our children are happy, but we still want a career. How can we make it easier for ourselves?
Gosh, I wish I knew the answer to that question, Anna, because everybody would want to know the answer to that. I mean, it's really difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I'm a mum, I work full time. It's a constant juggling and balancing. And I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to that question. I think it depends on each individual family and how they balance things. I think if I think about it from my perspective, it's about, I think work-wise, I am very boundaried about my work hours. I don't work late. I leave on time. But I am ruthlessly efficient at work in a way that I probably wasn't pre-children.
Yes.
So, you know, I take a smaller lunch break. I work really hard at work in order to be able to leave on time. And I'm very disciplined about the boundaries between work and home. I mean, I'm not perfect by any means, and we can all get sucked into checking our emails, but I really try to leave work, and the first couple of hours when I'm at home, leave everything electronic and just be with my kids, so that I'm not doing work plus kids, I'm just doing kids.
Yes.
And I think, you know, I wouldn't be able to do it without my husband, and, you know, it's constant negotiation with him of who's doing what and when, and, you know, we try to map it out so there's no surprises. And, you know, I wouldn't be able to do it without his support, because we're juggling it between us, which I think, you know, most families are. I think, you know, some of the things we've talked about. So, you know, I prioritise my own space and my own time, because that makes me a better mum, better at work. So we both have our things which religiously we go to each week. So I go to yoga every week, and, you know, that's my time, and I really need that as part of balancing all the pressures you're under. And, you know, it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? It's very difficult, and there are weeks where you feel you're failing and you're a bad mum and you feel awful, you've forgotten something for school, but I don't think there's any easy answer to that. I think it's about communication with, you know, within the family home, and making sure, checking in, making sure that everybody's okay. And I do think, you know, you have to, for me, it's about being very boundaried about work plus home.
Yeah.
Because you can't do both at the same time. So really try to switch off from work.
Yeah.
The moment I walk through the front door, and maybe I'll check in again later when the kids are asleep, but I won't do both at the same time when I'm at home.
Yeah. I know when my kids were very little, I set up my own business because I didn't want to have to be rigid about hours. And so I made absolutely sure that I was there to pick them up from school. I was there to give them something to eat. I was there basically until they went to bed, and then I'd work again afterwards. Mm-hmm. So I did like a split day almost, which I found worked really well. But it was my business, so I could do what I wanted. But later, when I had a different business, which was much more intensive, and I really had to do very long hours, I have always, and to this day, and my kids are now adult, and they're in couples, they've got kids, etc., etc. To this day, I feel guilty that I didn't spend enough time with them, and I didn't put enough focus on them. And I've told them, and they're like, "You're crazy, Mum. We had a great time, and there wasn't a problem." But I feel guilty because
I think we're very good as mums at feeling guilty. And beating ourselves up.
Yeah.
And like you say, if we ask the kids, they'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
As women, we're really good at feeling that guilt and feeling, "Oh, I haven't done this right." And actually, even if you're working as a full-time mum, it's about the quality. It's not about the quantity.
Yeah.
So even if you're working from 8 till 6, if you're coming home then and picking your child up from school or from nursery and having a really lovely focused time together for an hour a day, an hour, 2 hours a day, plus the weekends, that's what they'll remember.
Yes.
And I think whatever pattern of work women are doing, they shouldn't be feeling guilty about that. They shouldn't be beating themselves up about that at all.
Yeah.
Because, it's about the quality of the care provision, and women work in all different patterns of working, and invariably they've made it work for them and their family, whatever way that might be.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting, because I think if you ask the dads, they wouldn't have any of that guilt.
I know, it's ridiculous.
The maternal thing.
Yeah.
And I think we all do it and we all worry about it. But as you say, in reality, the kids aren't focused on that at all.
Yeah.
And I think also for me, part of it is about, I want my children to see me going to work. Yes. I want them to see that, I have a strong work ethic, and that I earn my own money, and, those things are really important.
Yes. Yeah, because you're showing independence and beliefs and values and things like that. So, do you think with the working mothers and trying to juggle all of that, is there anything that corporations or organisations can do to help with this?
I think there's a lot of things that big corporations could do that they probably don't do quite well enough yet, or not as uniformly. So I think, women commonly will talk about wanting them to offer them more flexible hours. Yeah. And I think that's not in place in a lot of big corporations as yet. Yeah. Or a lot of women would say, I'd rather work 4 long days to have a day off a week to be able to spend that day with my child. Yeah. So I think that's something that, really needs to be more meaningfully looked at.
Yes.
I think maternity leave is still an issue for a lot of people. It's definitely a lot better than it has been. And I think, being able to share maternal and paternal leave is great.
Yes.
So that's a really positive thing. And I think just the focus within corporations I find often women sort of feel that once they've had a child and gone back to work, there's sort of this division between women with children and women who don't have children, a sort of them and us thing.
Yes.
And not really understanding the pressures on each other. Yeah. And I think anything that corporations could do to foster the sense of team rather than women feeling they're competing against each other has only got to be a good thing, really.
Yeah.
I think, corporations could add in a lot more about supporting women's health in general.
Yes.
In understanding when women have to take time off for carers, for a carer's role for sick children. I think that could be much better understood and thought about within corporations. I think they could just be a lot more creative. I think women are an amazing resource and are very innovative and creative.
Yeah.
I think actually women, perhaps similar to what I've talked about, when they return to work after having children, they're often massively more productive because they really work when they're at work.
Yes.
And I think more needs to be highlighted, and thinking actually these women are an amazing resource because they're really working incredibly hard when they're here. I mean, I have one friend who works for a big corporation, and they've got the most wonderful program available to all their employees of things that they can access every lunchtime. So there's a yoga class one day, a Pilates class one day, for free as part of their working day. They've got the most beautiful canteen, which serves really healthy, lovely, high quality food. And all tiny things like that can really help to improve the health of employers, and also make them feel really valued.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to go to work if you don't feel valued.
Yeah.
Have all that sort of as part of your working life, I think, is a model that should be widespread.
Yeah.
Really good.
This is why, I mean, with the aspect of flexibility and flexible hours you mentioned, I really don't see why companies resist that, because it's got to be beneficial to them as well. Because if you get somebody that's doing flexible hours, they're happier, they're less stressed, they're more productive. But also, if you get people doing flexible hours, you actually have more hours of staff presence in the company, because some people will be starting early, some people will be finishing late. So it means, you've actually got more people in the company during the working day. So just from a purely business point of view, it's got to be a plus, as well as the productivity, etc. So I just fail to understand why some companies resist flexible hours. To me, it seems ideal.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't really understand the reluctance for companies to think about that as a model of working, really, because it makes absolute sense to me.
Yeah.
You are listening to Anna Letitia Cook at Women Up Radio.
Some of the things you've said about when we're pregnant and the issues surrounding that, I know you've already said you're a specialist in perinatal psychiatry. So can you tell us more? What are the extra issues and challenges that need to be taken into account, particularly during the pre- and postnatal period? And how can we look after ourselves better during this time, whether we're working or not? Because obviously that can have a big effect. It can have a big impact on what we do.
For a woman during pregnancy and in the postnatal period, it is one of the most vulnerable times in her entire lifetime, in terms of her having any kind of new episode of mental ill health.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something about pregnancy itself which is not yet fully understood that can trigger new episodes of illness for women in a way that doesn't happen at any other point in a woman's life apart from menopause. So it's probably a combination of being pregnant, hormonal changes.
Yeah.
Some women have an underlying genetic vulnerability. So it's a really vulnerable time for a woman's mental health, full stop.
Yeah.
And if you add into that just the physical demands of being pregnant, the psychological changes about thinking about becoming a mum, and perhaps, a career on top of that, you can see why it's a very vulnerable time.
Yeah.
So I think it's just having an awareness of that. I mean, I really don't want that to scare or frighten women, because some women sail through their pregnancy and have absolutely no problems whatsoever.
Yes.
But it's certainly, for a lot of women, it is a more difficult time, and they will have episodes of anxiety or low mood or perhaps intrusive thoughts or worries that they've not experienced before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really frightening and really overwhelming. So I think it's just, firstly, to be aware that it might be a time where you might need to look after yourself a bit more emotionally, and that things might feel a bit different.
Yeah.
And to seek help, to talk to somebody if you feel that those things are changing. So often that might be with your midwife, and there is amazing provision now within the United Kingdom for supporting women emotionally through pregnancy. The UK is really one of the world leaders in perinatal care.
Yes.
So if you are struggling or worried, then there's lots of help and support out there. And it should be, offered support, and things can be picked up and treated very quickly in pregnancy. I think postnatally, again, it's the same. It's a very difficult time for women. They're much more likely to feel unwell mentally. And also, we all know you're absolutely exhausted, you're not sleeping, you might be living geographically separate from family, you might not know anybody with a small baby. It can be a very lonely, difficult time.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing. It's about reaching out, letting people know that you're struggling. There are loads and loads of supports that you can access, whether that's online, peer groups, baby groups, or whether it's having to have some therapy. But there are a huge array of different supports that you can access. And I think not being frightened to say, again, I'm just struggling a bit, I'm finding this more difficult than I expected, that people aren't going to judge you, people aren't going to think that you're a bad mum.
Yep.
But there are loads and loads of things that can help and support you through that period.
Yeah. And I know, I didn't have any issues. I was lucky. I did actually sail through pregnancy. But I was followed very closely because I've got a blood disorder. So I had to go in and see people very, very often. So I think they could keep an eagle eye on me. But one of the things I found afterwards, I definitely felt very low and I was totally exhausted. But I had the most amazing midwife, and she'd pop in 2 or 3 times a week, even more for the first maybe 2-3 months. When she was on her way to visit somebody else, and she'd sit down, she'd change the baby, she'd make me a cup of tea, and she'd say, sleep. She said, forget the house, forget the shopping. You've got a husband, he can do the shopping. Dirt has never hurt anyone, just sleep. So she was...
Well, she sounds absolutely amazing.
She was great.
Yeah, she sounds fantastic. And I think it's really important. I'm always really careful I don't want to over medicalize what for many women is just a normal transition being a new mum. So I think too often women go to their GP. This is not to demonise GPs at all, but saying they feel a bit low or a bit flat, and actually they're just exhausted. They're not sleeping. They're getting used to this baby. They're missing work. Yeah. They're a bit lonely, and that's not depression. Yes. And I think you have to be really careful not to label everything as depression.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of women just feel they're handed antidepressants, and that's not really what they want, or that they're not being listened to. Clearly postnatal depression can be extremely serious, and there are cases that need hospital admission and will need medication. Yeah. But I think sometimes there's a jump to a woman just sitting there feeling just fed up and a bit teary, and that's not necessarily depression. So I think we have to think a lot more creatively about how we support women through that process. And like you say, for most women, if they have got someone around that they can have a good old moan to, have a cry with, somebody to take the baby for a while, they can catch a little bit of sleep, they can go and sit outside in the sunshine, they can have a cup of coffee, they can read a magazine for half an hour, and after that they feel much more human again.
Yeah, we just feel re-energized.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really hard time for all of us. I absolutely would say the same, that I felt very low and teary and anxious for a good few months after the birth of my daughter.
Yeah,
I wasn't depressed, but it just wasn't quite my normal self.
Yes.
But, I also had a very colicky baby who would scream every night and didn't sleep well, and I was barely getting any sleep, and I found it hard to sleep in the day, and I didn't really know anybody else, particularly with small children. So it's a very long, lonely, tiring day when you're on your own with a small baby.
Yeah.
And it lifted and it passed, and I think it's hard because we want to encourage people to seek help.
Yeah.
But I don't want women to think that all they can be offered is antidepressants, because that's not the case at all. So, the women we work with, we would have a whole host of different things that we would offer. Some of it's just we would link them up with a local mum who would see them once a week and have a cup of tea, take them out to the park, maybe take the baby out, let them sleep. And that can be a lifeline. That can be all that women need to feel 100% better.
Yeah.
So there are a huge amount of creative ways that you can help mum that doesn't have to mean medication.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes with career women as well, because they're so used to being competent and skilled and leaders, when their usual way of treating a team or a colleague doesn't work on a baby, they panic because they're like, oh my God, what do I do? It's not working. And it's just...
I think it's really difficult for career women.
Yeah.
I really do. I think that's something that I would see all the time. So these are women that are hugely competent. They're used to doing what they want when they want. They're very independent. They're very able. They're very bright. And suddenly they're faced with this little being that they can't really understand what it wants yet. They can't control it.
Yeah.
Everything goes out the window, and it's really anxiety provoking.
Yeah.
Because it is that loss of control.
Yeah.
And, for someone it means then they stop going out because they're worried in case the baby cries, and they can't stop the baby crying, will everyone look at them? And, it's really difficult. And they're so used to being able to micromanage every aspect of their life. And then this baby just arrives and blows everything to pieces.
Yeah.
And that can be hugely anxiety provoking. And it takes, some women quite a while to adapt to that and be able to go with the flow of it more and realize that it's okay and that you don't have to have routines straight away.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult for some women. I find it very hard, that process.
Well, I know with my kids, I had mine very close together, but I would not go in a restaurant with them until they were about 4 or 5. Absolutely, I would not in a million years. I wouldn't go on a plane with them because I was paranoid that they were going to scream the place down and everyone would get annoyed. And then I look at my daughter-in-law, because my grandson's now a year old, and since day one she's been so relaxed and so calm, and she'll go anywhere with Harry. And maybe she's just a much better mother than I am, which is quite likely, but she just seems to have such a calmness, and she's so relaxed about it that everyone around has relaxed as well. Whereas I definitely wasn't.
I mean, I think that's a really common fear. I often meet women that, will avoid going on, wouldn't dream of going on plane, would be nervous to go on the train with the baby, would avoid getting on the bus when it's really busy, would try and go to groups, but then baby cries and they feel so overwhelmed and embarrassed that they would just get up and leave.
Yeah.
And that's a really common fear, but I think I'd always try to reassure women that we have all been in that situation, and that actually you think everyone's looking at you and judging you, and they're not. They're probably just remembering when that happened to them.
Yes.
And thinking, oh gosh, I remember that, and it's so anxiety. They're not being judged, but it's a really common fear. And I think the other thing is, about you're saying about your daughter-in-law, that perhaps things have changed in that, now children are very much more taken and accepted everywhere. So I think that does make it easier.
Yes.
A lot of places are much more child-friendly in a way that they wouldn't have been in the past. So I think that helps mothers. And I think, if you think of things like cinema sessions now, where they have cinema sessions particularly for mums and babies, that's fantastic. So mums can go out and sit in the cinema and watch a film, you know, and things like that just wouldn't have existed 10 or 15 years ago. You know, being able to go to an exercise class with baby strapped onto you. I mean, these are brilliant things for mums.
I think it's a great idea.
Reduces, you know, loneliness, and there's going to be somebody else there with a baby that cries all the way through the class, and that's fine.
Yeah.
It will happen to all of us at one point. We will have that time where they scream through the whole thing, and that's just the nature of babies. It's not about the mum.
Yeah. So, and I know you just mentioned exercise classes. I know you're very strong about supporting the use of holistic methods for treating any kind of problems, not necessarily pre and postnatal, but anything to do with stress or anxiety or whatever. And you really like empowering women so that they feel connected to their body and health, and they lead their own care. So can you tell us more about this and how nutrition and exercise can be used to our benefit?
Yeah, absolutely. So any woman that I'm working with, you would want to map out a really collaborative plan. I don't want to sit and tell women what to do, because that's not going to work, and that's not the way that I would work. So we would think about the symptoms they were having, and then we would think about ways that they could build into their life things like diet and exercise. And I would be very clear with women that I would see that as part of their treatment. So it's not just suggestions that I'm making, it's part of their treatment, and it's really important so that they, you know, feel they can fully focus and commit to it and make space in their life for it. So with exercise, for example, you know, we would think about where in their life they could build in something realistic, you know, and it's not about having to exercise every day, particularly if you're working. That's just not going to be feasible, and that ends up being more stressful.
Yeah,
because you're thinking, how am I going to fit this in? So it might be 1 hour a week or 1 to 2 hours a week. So we think about what type of exercise they really enjoy and where they will fit that in, and they will speak to their partner, or, you know, to make sure that that's mapped into the week and something that they can really commit to and make that part of their treatment. And in terms of exercise, it can be really any type of exercise that you know, a woman enjoys.
Yes.
It's just about that consistency of going and feeling you have the space, and then that's really empowering because it's your time.
Yes.
And then you feel better from it afterwards as well. There might be, you know, for some women where they can't do that outside of the home, there are so much amazing resources online now that you can use in terms of short exercise videos or yoga videos or guided meditation. So it doesn't need to mean that you have to join a costly gym, or it can literally be 10-15 minutes. Perhaps women will get up earlier before everybody else has got up, or when the children are at bed at night. Even just doing 10 or 15 minutes makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
On top of the exercise, you know, you might also try to suggest something like meditation or mindfulness, which, you know, as a practice, you have to commit to it. But invariably where women do, it makes a massive difference to their overall wellness and anxiety. And again, there are so many amazing resources now, whether that be online or apps, particularly things like Headspace or Buddhify, that are phone apps where you can literally have a 5-minute guided meditation. So it's 5 minutes. You know, and if you can just do that pre going to bed or early in the morning and do that consistently, then it makes a huge amount of difference. In terms of diet, you know, I think there's so much overwhelming. We're bombarded with what to eat and how to eat, and this diet this week and this diet next week, and that can be a real sense of anxiety and worry, I think, for women. It changes from week to week. So I'm not at all prescriptive in terms of this is the diet you must eat or not. But I think what it is about is just all the simple things that we probably know but forget when we're busy and feeling anxious. So, you know, eating regularly, avoiding excess caffeine, eating a really good, rich, varied diet with lots of, you know, as many vegetables, green vegetables, plants as possible.